Hello, everyone. This is Debra Richardson, and today I am putting the AP in Happy, where accounts payable teams are empowered to protect the vendor master file from fraud. This podcast will give a voice to accounts payable team members by talking about the growing reality of cyber attacks in their world and which vendor setup and vendor management techniques they can apply to protect the vendor master file from fraud. Need training? Visit the Vendor Process Training Center to enroll in your choice of weekly live and on-demand training sessions. Plus, get access to vendor setup form templates and reference tools that will help you and your team avoid fraud, fines, and bad vendor data. So sign up for a free account to get access to free training sessions, vendor process FAQs, and a resource library with information you need to manage your vendor master file. Visit training.debrarrichardson.com today. The link will be in the show notes. Add this additional verification when onboarding vendors that are individuals or sole proprietors to avoid fraud. What is it, and what resources you can use to perform the validations? Keep listening. Welcome to episode 314, Find Fraud with this verification for vendors that are individuals or sole proprietorships. Now, where did I get this topic from? Well, number one, I wanted a quick topic because I am on my way to the IOFM AP P2P, so accounts payable, but now they do have an accounts receivable track too. So accounts receivable professionals, in addition to accounts payable professionals, come to this conference that I'm on my way to in the fall of every year. Actually, they have two. One in the spring, which is in Florida, and then one in the fall, which is typically in Vegas. They did go a couple of years where they went to other places, but this year is back in Vegas. And so today is November 4th, Monday, and I am heading out to that conference, and the conference days are November 6th through the 8th, so it's Wednesday through Friday. So I wanted to make sure I got a quick topic in before I left, and I was reading this newsletter that I am subscribed to. It's Frank on Fraud, and I'll put a link to his newsletters in case you want to sign up. But in the one that was dated October 29th, it was an article entitled Ghost. 160,000 of them apply for auto loans each year. And I never really thought about it, but that's actually a lot. That's one in every 625 auto applications. But what he said is that it returns to a Social Security number that's listed on the death master file. And then it dawned on me that could be the same with vendors where you receive their Social Security number. How do you know that that information is not on the death master file? Now, number one, maybe you will find that out right when you do the 10 match, because the name, if they've used a different name, the name and the Social Security number won't match. But I know many of you do not do the IRS 10 match at the time of vendor setup. Plus, if they've used the same name, then it's not going to come out as the results won't be a mismatch. So you do need to do the death master file check. Now, you may be thinking, well, how many Social Security numbers do I really get from our vendors? Because maybe you think you have vendors that are entities, large businesses, but you may have a significant population of vendors that are in that first tax class of individual sole proprietors. And remember, that first tax class on the W-9, is the one that also has single member LLCs. They just happen to take that description off of that first tax class because they had it on the prior versions of the W-9s. But when the March 2024 version was published, it was published without it. But that's still the same tax class that a single member LLC would select because they are going by, right, the tax status of the actual owner. They should still put their first name and last name on line 1. And per the IRS, right, even though the sole proprietor or single member LLC may have an EIN, an employer identification number, the IRS still prefers, when they do have both, to collect, or for you to collect, a social security number. So you may have more social security numbers than you think, especially if your tax not your tax, but if your accounting system or ERP does not have a separate field for social security numbers versus EINs versus other tax registration numbers or business or individual registration numbers, because there are a lot per country. Some systems will have multiple fields. Some systems will only have one field, and maybe you don't know if that number is a social security number or an EIN because maybe the formatting is different. Maybe you don't have a separate field to tell what it is. And again, maybe you just have that one field. So you may have more social security numbers than you know. But what I recommend is that, yes, you do the social security death master file check. Now, the question you may be asking is, where do I do that check at, right? Because it's not something that's all readily available, especially if you haven't sought it out. There may be some third-party providers that you're using for vendor validations. They may have it, and I may not know of them, but I do know of at least 2. The first one, I talk about it all the time. And by the way, neither of these do I have affiliate relationships with. So it's not something that I'm going to profit from if you check these vendors out and decide to use one. So the first one is one that I always recommend because it has multiple validations in one validation check, and that is 10check.com. And 10check.com was, if you've used it in the past, it has recently gone through a refresh because Sovos purchased it. I think it was back in September of 2021, and they did a refresh this year. I think it was sometime in May or June. But anyway, it's the same thing. It's the same lookups. It's just a refreshed user interface where when you enter in the vendor's legal name and the tax ID, and you can still enter in the U.S. address, it will perform validations, including the 10 match, including 42 different watch lists that has OFAC as well, which if you're a U.S. company, you have to make sure that you're checking your vendors against that watch list or those that consolidated. I think it's 2 sets of consolidated watch lists. So you do need to make sure you're checking that. And then the other thing that it will do is it will check if you enter in a social security number, it will check it against the social security death master file. And let me rephrase that. It will check whatever tax ID you enter in the field against the social security death master file. However, it's only relevant and it only is a match if you entered in a social security number. So if you entered in an employer identification number or EIN and it comes back with a match, then you need to make sure that you are ignoring the results from the death master file check because you didn't put in a social security number, and that's all it's looking for. However, it would have been nice if the social security office or administration would have maybe collaborated with the IRS to make sure that their 9-digit numbers, the employer identification number or EIN, didn't overlap the social security number, but maybe that wasn't even possible. In any event, it wasn't done. So I once had a question on a webinar about what do you do with all the false positives? Well, it's really not a false positive because they tell you the description on the Social Security Death Master File verification, the results. It tells you right on that field, on that description, that if you entered in an EIN, then you can disregard it. So make sure you're disregarding that. Now, the next one is a company I work with all the time. I actually use their vendor validation standalone tool, which will do the same thing as 10-check. You enter in one time and you're doing it. It's like a vendor self-registration portal, except it's a tool just for you to key in your vendor's information and then get the results back. And again, that's vendor info, and they have a tool just for AP to use. And not only will it do what I just talked about 10-check doing, that includes, right, the Social Security or the check against the Social Security Death Master File, but it also do bank account ownership validation for recently not only domestic or U.S. banks, but also non-U.S. banks. Now, both of those references or resources for the Death Master File check are on my vendor validation reference list with resource links. And so I'm going to put a link to that in the show notes so you can download it and get links to both 10check.com and also vendor info. And I do have one more, but I honestly don't know anyone that's using it. So the Social Security Administration themselves says that organizations, eligible entities or organizations can have access to those records, but it doesn't define how, and it doesn't define, who is considered eligible entity or organization. So I'll put a link to that as well in the show notes. And maybe you can follow up directly with the Social Security Administration and find out how you can have direct access. All right. Well, that is it for today. Hope you learned something new. I'm going to run out here and go to the IOFM conference. And if you're going to be there, make sure that you check me out. We meet in real life and have breakfast or lunch at the same table. So thanks, everyone. I hope you enjoyed the 314th episode of the Putting the AP in Happy podcast, where accounts payable teams are empowered to protect the vendor master file from fraud. Don't forget to check the show notes for the links mentioned in the podcast. And if you enjoyed this episode, consider subscribing and writing a review of my podcast on the platform that you use to listen. Stay happy.